Hello, everyone. This is meteorologist Tom Downs from Weatherbell Analytics, and I'm here with the Chief Meteorologist Joe Bastardi, and we're going to talk about winter for you folks who are Schoenberg Sol clients. And so, Joe, right off the bat, this is our first forecast for the November through March period that we had in August, and we're kind of sticking with it.
Yeah, we've been alluding to it since April, and the idea behind the game is to try to coming off last winter is to see what was starting to transpire as far as we felt that there was going to be a strong El Nino for one, but there are a lot of very different variables around this El Nino. For instance, it's like having a great quarterback, all right, but you don't know what's going on with the receivers, the blockers, and everybody else around them because they're so different this year. And so we've come up with this map that's a blend of four original analogs back in uh, in April 50. We went 57, 65, '02, and '09, which of course most of you are familiar, especially with the '09 winter. And then as we went along, we added some extra members. So we come up with a map that is cold across the south and warmer across the north. Of course, the normals are colder in the north, so it leads to sort of a interesting, interesting weather pattern. Basically, it's sort of modeled after the winter of '86, '87, which turned out to be a huge winter in the mid-Atlantic states. That doesn't mean that '86, '87 is the number one analog. It means that when we throw it all together, somehow or the other, that map looked the best. But there are other things that are going on here, and we're going to get to that down the road
And then
here. As far
2009 too, Joe, was one of those winters that was big in the Mid-Atlantic, at least the southern parts of the Mid-Atlantic.
Oh yeah, and of course we had the big December storm too. I tell people all the time that sometimes one or two storms can make a winter, and it's a matter of getting them to line up at the right time. And what we're looking at this year is a lot of the signaling globally is exactly opposite of last year. Well, I mean, we get the exact opposite effect. It means the I-95 corridor has above normal snowfall.
And right off the
And
bat, here's our forecast with basically, Joe, just to explain this, right? It's a percent of normal forecast. So 100% is normal, and anything below that is to the north and west of the line here in the west, and north in the Great Lakes here is below normal, but slightly below normal. And anything to the south of this line is expected to be above normal for the winter.
right, and again, it's the reason if everything went the right way, it'd be much colder and much snowier than this. But if you take the map literally in New York City, it says probably 26 to 35 inches of snow and temperature maybe a degree below normal, which you say, well, that's not that big a deal. The problem is if you pile it all in at once, if most of the snow falls in a 2 week period, and there are a couple of real good cold shots with winds whipping around behind it, even that kind of winter, like 65, 66, it was a 3 week period where it was, people remember that winter real fondly, but it was only really 3 weeks. And even Snowmageddon, was a 5 week period and it kept coming and coming. But this is a pretty bullish forecast. It's certainly a lot different from what we saw last year.
Oh yeah, that's an understatement. And we're gonna go through the whole PowerPoint presentation that we have made up for everyone, and it's getting into some of the gory details here, but also some of the things that can go wrong with the forecast, things that can go even from both directions. A little warmer, a little colder, a little snowier, a little more wild winter. And Joe, this is kind of the map here that really stands out to me as a forecaster. I mean, look at this El Nino here, but there's other stuff going on that we'll get into in a bit. But this is a pretty impressive El Nino from a sea surface temperature standpoint.
Oh, it's a tremendous El Nino. It's third or fourth strongest on record. The problem is that the normal El Nino has cold water in the Pacific, both near 40 North, and this is called the Pacific Tripolar. And what happens is you take the sea surface temperatures, and when you see that kind of difference in sea surface temperatures, you're going to get much different feedback than what you're going to get from it. Let's put the previous back on. Warm over warm doesn't do, but in other words, the temperature difference is what we're looking for here. And so we are in a very, very unusual situation because some of the other indices, for instance, uh, that Pacific tripole I was talking about there, uh, this is almost has not happened the with an El Nino the way it is now. You can see what the standard El Nino looks like, and there's none of them that have the amount of warm water where one is that you see there. So that's going to change the feedback in the atmosphere from the regular El Nino. And also, if you look over at the Indian Ocean, it's cold in the eastern Indian Ocean and warm in the western Indian Ocean. And what that means, and that if we go back to the last map, is that it's liable to rain a lot in East Africa and not rain that much in Indonesia. And you say, well, what does that have to do with us? Well, what happens is those rain and the thunderstorms release heat into the atmosphere. And so last year at this time, the orange represents dry, the blue represents wet. You could see the model going for a certain type of signal. And what happens is when you get all this going off in the tropics, remember the immense amount of energy available in the tropics, and then it pumps it into the atmosphere. You got the response you did. And what we felt last winter was, okay, we know that going in, but we thought there were other signals that would balance it out and put the center of the cold in the center of the country, not in the western part of the country. We never had it cold in the east. We had a little bit above normal and near normal snowfall. But this now, if you look at this and look at what it looks like this year, it's exactly opposite. If we move to the next slide, look at that. It's completely turned around. So the feedback is going to be completely turned around. And that favors the what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation being in the phases favoring cold weather in the United States, and strongly so. You see that phase 4 and 5. You see where the blue is? Now, those are the warm. If we go back real quick so I could describe this, phase 4 and 5 is what we had last year most of the time. And then if we go to the correlation, right, you can see 4 is down here in the lower left and 5 is up here and 6. Like these are the kiss of death for the United States winter. But if you notice 7, 8, and 1 are cold. And when we go to this year, we see the exact opposite. It looks like it's saying it's phase 8. In other words, whenever the Madden-Julian oscillation amplifies, it'll come out into phase 8. All right. Instead of coming out into 4, 5, and 6.
And Joe, what that is that just to back up a little bit, is that the Madden-Julian oscillation is basically the hemispheric or global pattern that creates the jet stream and all the different storms that come, and that pattern kind of delivers the cold air, or delivers the cold air to the western U.S., delivers the cold air to the eastern U.S., and depending on where it is, I mean that's kind of how the whole global pattern sets up, and this is kind of the guts of everything that we're looking at right now.
Right. So it looks opposite last year. Plus, there are other factors. We have an immense amount of water vapor has been pumped into the air from the El Nino and from the big volcano last year, and this is going to it's going to lead to blocking. And wherever that block sets up, you can see. I mean, this is if you want a snowy cold winter, this is sort of the ultimate look. This is the Japanese model, where you have a ridge in Western Canada. You have another ridge over Greenland, the trough underneath, and you basically just keep delivering Arctic air into the eastern part of the United States, central part of the United States. We haven't seen something like this since the 1970s. You see that we've seen blocks, but most of the blocks don't extend all the way back into Western Canada. And that is a crucial situation there. That's exactly opposite of last year, by the way. There's a big trough out there, and the ridge was where you see the trough. So there are a lot of things.
And Joe, that's one of the things in 2002, 2003 winter as well, one of the analogs that had that big ridge up in Western Canada. And
it was more pronounced, 76, 77, 77, 78. It's like it was on steroids. And it's kind of interesting because I'm looking at okay, we talk about these other winters. There's a winter in 91, 92, for instance, in 94, 95, which were non-winters. that have some similarities. But what they did not have was what we're seeing that's going to be developing in December. And we have a major stratospheric warming event that looks like it's going to occur in December. And what happens is you see that when that big red bomb goes on, now it doesn't make it cold immediately. If we go back to the map before, if we go back to the map before, I'm sorry, Tom. Um, there's the jet starting to cut underneath during the month of December. And that would imply to me, because of the way November would evolve, that it would be mid and late December that would be colder relative to averages in the front of December. It takes a while to move it across. But if we keep moving on here and we see the block develops. All right, go move to the next one here, and we'll see if I can
Yeah,
figure
this
out
is
what I'm
the
doing.
brutal January is what this model's
January,
forecasting.
it's for some of you Warren Zevon fans, it's send lawyers, guns, and money. That is the coldest run of the JMA, and I've been looking at this model for 11 years. The European is bullish. It was more bullish in September, but it pulled the trough back a little bit further west for the heart of the winter. And when it did, I have mixed emotions about that. I certainly can see that it would still be a pretty good winter, but this would be, lights out tonight, trouble in the heartland type thing where, I mean, you could just start getting pounded and have it very, very cold between storms. And that's something that we don't see that much, or we haven't seen that much in the last several years. We're getting big storms, but it doesn't stay consistently cold.
And Joe, getting
So
back to this stratospheric warming event for December, we can also run that type of example in the past, and we can see what similar past events did and how things evolved in the Decembers and Januaries that followed.
yeah, this is what I did was, and I'm sure Mark knows the way I just absolutely love my job and love what I do. I went back through every year from 1950 and look at what December stratospheric temperatures were. And so what I did was I pulled out all the years that happened, and this is what you come up with, and it looks very similar to where the modeling's going. Go to the next one there. So so what it does is it does give us a widespread, what looks to be a widespread cold winter. All right, and it appears that January and February are the real two the toughest months. This is the January, I believe. I can't see because my face is in the way here. Uh, no, this is January. That was December, I think, if my memory
Right,
serves
so
me correct.
January, this is January, and then February that follows is warm in the
Yeah,
northwest and cooler to the east, and even March you'd start to see that modification of the
yeah,
pattern. Things happen, but as you mentioned too, there's a lot of different El Ninos and types of events, whether they're stratospheric warming events, El Ninos, and the different types. You can also group these into different clusters.
right.
So there's
And
a
this cluster is where the stratospheric warming in December, El Nino, and a similar TPI. Now, the TP by this Pacific Tripole. Uh, when I say similar, I mean they're on the same sign. They have the same sign, but this one is so much. The one we're seeing now is, sort of an outlier. It's so much stronger than the other ones. But watch what happens here, right?
And that's going
Again,
back to
this is
this map, this tripole, where you see those three different areas that going back to
right.
that. But you can see what happens, Joe, is that you can see the differences in these, and you can look at a subset. So this is the brutal subset, right? And you mentioned
Yeah,
some of
this
these
is
years before.
yeah, 69, 70, 76, 77, 77, 78. Remember, we have the stratospheric warming in December. What happened in those years? The ridge got back into Western Canada, along all the way over the top to Greenland at 500 millibars. So that's the coldest. And then we have a couple here, 86, 87, 02, 03, which, was like I said, that 86, 87 winter is what it sort of looks like. But the combination of these wound up to be big snow years in the mid Atlantic states and and to New York City, a couple big storms in New York City. And then we go to this is the jet blue winter for those of you who might remember it. The next one, 06, 07, where February really got cold. I mean, February is brutal in the Ohio Valley, one of the coldest on records, but overall was an underachiever. And I said the jet blue store because that was the year they sat a plane for 7 hours out on the runway at LaGuardia thinking it was going to change the rain, and it just stayed sleeting at 28 degrees the entire time. That was the one big storm of that season in New York City. Was basically sleet that you couldn't move or do anything with. But and then we get to the stinker, and which is 91, 92, which shows you the worst. If you're looking for snow, this is like a worst case scenario over here. And there's modeling that says that. And I mean, if you look at the NOAA, and it's not a forecast, it's guidance because it's a probability. We're giving you a forecast. We have temperatures and snow amounts. You could actually measure it. All right. But the NOAA guidance looks a lot like the stinker winter. So, and I look at them. There's smart people over there. But I will say that in reading our discussion, we've got some other weapons that we pull out. Of course, the secret weapon really is Joe DeLeo, who I'm not saying he's God, but he might be Moses when it comes to meteorology, knowing all the stuff that he does. And he gets involved with some of the, like the QBO and some of these other things, which are also favoring a colder winter solution here.
Yeah, and if you just look at El Nino and to say, oh, it's the strongest El Nino on record, I remember, 15, 16 and 97, 98 and their stinker of a winters, even 91, 92 to a certain extent is in that ballpark, but not as quite as extreme. You do see some winters that have warmth and you do have some winters that have cold. It's just that our job here is to pick out the winters that are similar but different. And that's one of the things that people use with this El Nino term, Madoki. It's a Japanese term that means similar but different. And it says it's an El Nino, but just because it's El Ninos, not all El Ninos come in the same flavor. It might be ice cream, but it might be chocolate, it might be vanilla, it might be pistachio. And our job here is to figure out what the flavor is going to be. And this is where all this work that you've done, Joe, really helps make the determination of what type of winter we're expecting here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Joe and I weren't working together, of course, in 02, 03, but we came up with the same winter forecast, and everybody said it was going to be a warm winter, and we weren't. He was up at, forget where he was working, but I was working at AccuWeather. And we said, no, this is a kind of El Nino makes a cold winter. And what we should have done was we should have named it, because 2 years later, I believe it was Georgia State University, I can't remember who, some researchers decided that the kind of winter we had in 02, 03, where it's warmer it's warmer in a certain part of the Pacific than it is in the East Pacific and near the date line, they call that a Madoki winter, right? And so I coined the term this year, it's a migrating Madoki, and it's in large scale response to a 3-year La Nina, which means next year at this time, I expect us to be back in a La Nina again. Tom has pointed out sometimes that we overall, the entire weather patterns in a La Nina base state, and these El Ninos, they can show up, be strong, but they come and go. But the question is, where is the water warmest? And it looks like it's migrating toward those areas. Now, let me give you a wild card here. And this is important. And some of you that follow me know how I've been getting into this. We've been watching volcanic activity off South America, because in 15, 16, and 97, 98, what they call the Wolf family of volcanoes just kept going off, going off, going off, and it kept 1.2 warmer. And if 1.2 were to stay warm relative to ENSO, what we call ENSO 3.4, then you're probably looking at sort of the kiss of death. But remember, 15, 16, we had an unbelievable snowstorm. The fact is, when you have these El Ninos, you're going to have a southern storm track. If you have any cold air, with any respect at all, you're going to get a pretty good amount of snow. The question is it melt the next day? Or does it Does it keep coming? Well, if you get 3, 4 storms in a row, but there's sort of what we settled on as far as how this is going to work.
And I think if you look at 86, 87, 02, 03, that's similar to the type of winter that we're looking at, when we see maybe some warmth up in the upper Midwest, kind of that typical El Nino hot zone there. And then the east here will see some good cold shots. And then it's really, as you said, Joe, going back to the typical snowy pattern during El Nino it's because of this southern track, and it's cold in the south because it's raining. It's raining and there's a lot of moisture, and the moisture comes into the Pacific. You hear the Pineapple Express term thrown along. The subtropical jet gets pushed into the southwest coast and increases moisture across the southwest, and then further along here, once it goes over the Rockies, it gets a little dried out. But then once you get it into the southeast there, you have another influx of Gulf moisture, Atlantic moisture, and that's when you have those storms right up the coast. Last year we had none of those. It's probably the first winter in my memory in a long time that didn't have any real nor'easters going on. Um, and
Yeah,
that and that was one of the symptoms of what was going on. What was wrong last winter was that, hey, it didn't even rain much. It didn't even snow much. It was kind of mild, and it was because of the lack of storms altogether. This year we're kind of expecting the exact opposite again, where we're going to see a colder and stormier winter than last year. It could even be a great winter, as we're saying here, based on some of the good years that we're seeing in the mix. And the current forecast, you said this at the outset, Joe, November to March, a 5-month period, 1 to 2 degrees below normal for New York City. 26 to 35 inches seems to be where we're going, which is on the above normal side. It could be normal to above normal. Do we hit 40 inches, kind of the benchmark of snowy winters in New York City? It's definitely a quite possibility. Do we hit below 20?
yeah,
There's some of those years in there that are in that mix, but the more we dig into this, the more we're confident that we're going to see a pretty significant winter here.
yeah. And talking to Mark, the last 3 winters, I talked to him. We chit chat because he's a weather fanatic. I just absolutely love Mark because no matter what I do, he thinks I'm right. But no, but he's always at the beginning of the season. I'm always worried about it being warmer than what I have. And this year, my if this forecast is going to have an error, I think it would be that it's colder and snowier than what I have, which is something that I can't recall uh, me thinking over the past few years. I mean, when we put out a forecast, you're trying to, and we've put out some pretty darn good forecasts overall. But I've almost always worried about being warmer than what we have. And this year, I think I'm not worried about it being colder. I think if it's colder and snowier, as long as we keep you ahead, you'll be in good shape. And as far as right now, if you bank on that, you're positioning yourself in a pretty good position in my opinion.
And even just taking one final comment from me is that when we have these winters that are have some uncertainty, they usually tend to be under forecasted, just because they're, especially with some of the warm winters that we've had in the unexciting winters, and part of that is because of early on. So don't get discouraged based on what you see early on. If you remember, we had some pretty chilly Novembers over the last couple years. Those years tend to be really, really chilly, and we get some early snows, and then they back off. And we had some exciting weather in December as well last year, and then they backed off. This year we're almost expecting the opposite. We're going to get to Thanksgiving, and people are going to start. I always notice this. I've been doing this 20 years. Joe, you've been doing it longer than that, but every year around Thanksgiving we get calls. Oh, it's not. You said it was going to be cold and snowy. It's not cold and snowy yet. Look, December is not supposed to be cold and snowy in New York City, for instance.
Yeah,
I
what is
mean,
it average? Worst 5, 6 inches
yeah,
of
even
snow?
less than that. I think it's just a handful of inches, maybe 2 or 3 inches. And you do see some years where you get 5, 6 inch snowstorms in December. But for the most part, you might not get any snow until January. You might have an inch or two
Yeah.
there in one of those storms, but don't be discouraged from what you see around Thanksgiving. Just because you have a fast, rip-roaring start doesn't mean you're going to continue to have snow. Conversely, if you have a warm kind of blah start, you're really, you really actually might be a sign that things are going to change moving into December and January, and especially with the signals that we see, we really feel that's going to happen as we head deeper into December, and especially when we get to January.
Yeah. Now, let me just say something about Thanksgiving week. I agree with Tom on the East Coast, but I'll tell you, I'm looking at this pattern in Thanksgiving week from where I am back here in my bunker in the mountains of central Pennsylvania. Maybe it's because I saw my first snow of the season this year. It's starting to, my equations changed from hurricane over to snow. Yeah, Thanksgiving week could be really, really interesting, but it would have to be west. In the way I'm looking at it, something in the Ohio Valley or whatever. Um, but I'm just saying that we're in a pattern of transient, what we call transients right now. You're going to see it warm up in about 10, it's going to try to warm on the weekend for some. We'll get colder again and start warming up. It's going back and forth. And so this is going to continue. And I suspect it'll be biased warmer than normal in most places until mid-December, and then we start seeing what happens. I want to see if that block starts cranking. It's like putting red meat in front of a rabid dog when I see that stuff. And Tom keeps me under control because he knows about what we call the lag relationship. So we'll try to nail that period. But I would say it's mid late December, January into February.
And thanks very much, Joe. I mean, just to wrap this up here, please stay tuned to the Schoenberg companies and Weatherbell. We'll be having updates for Mark and Schoenberg salt every week, like we typically do every winter. But for the most part, this will kind of get us kicked off and into the mindset as we enter November here. And thanks very much, Chief Meteorologist Joe Bastardi here
And
at Weatherbell.
Tom, can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.